Hello, everyone. My name's Martin Bose. I am the co-host of the On the Fly podcast, and we want to welcome you to this exciting new opportunity for sharing casual conversations around coaching youth lacrosse. I'll be joined by my co-host, Joey Picard, and we both have a long history of coaching and teaching this game that we're so passionate about, and we wanted to make something particular for youth lacrosse coaches, administrators, and families. This podcast is powered by Massachusetts Youth Lacrosse, and we're excited to share this content with you each and every week. Enjoy.
Welcome to On the Fly. This is a podcast about youth lacrosse, and these are conversations we're having about the challenges, but also the fulfillments of coaching. I'm Joey Picard, and as always, joined by the incomparable Martin Bose. And today we have a wonderful addition to our panel in Tosh Adams from the great program of Scituate, Massachusetts. Tosh is going to tell us about her background as a former athlete, and by the way, a Hall of Fame athlete from Columbia University, by the way, no big deal. She's going to tell us about her tenure as a coach, both at the youth and the high school, which is perfect for today's topic, and perhaps even about her company, Connected Coaching, and the philosophies that she champions every day as a one-on-one mental performance coach. As I introduced, we have a really fantastic topic, and that's the differences between youth athletes and high school athletes, and what we, as youth coaches, need to understand about these contrasts so that we can properly prepare these kids for their next chapter. But also what we need to remind ourselves of in the present tense so that we can be the best teachers and role models for these kids today in the environment that we currently have them in. So let's start by introducing our guest, Tosh Adams. Tosh, we're going to ask you to give us your 20-second bio. I have a fun icebreaker for everyone today. But let me start by saying one other thing. I'm delighted to always get to know the coaches in Massachusetts and New England. Most of my interaction is getting to know these people through keyboards, as we schedule, as we town administrate. I often get to see people face to face at the New England convention. But Tosh, you're somebody that I have the pleasure of seeing on an annual basis, as you and I both have sons in the same grade. We coach against each other in neighboring and great rival programs. It's always such a pleasure to see you, and I'm personally very excited to have you today.
Awesome. I am so excited to be here, and I love that you guys have started this initiative, and I can get behind pretty much anything that Mass Youth Lacrosse puts out, and I'm excited to see where this goes. So thanks for having me.
So give us your 20-second bio.
20-second bio. I was the youngest of three and the youngest of many cousins as well, in a very sports-centered family, and whatever was happening, I wanted in. And there weren't a lot of us were not girls. I was the only girl in my family. Most of the cousins weren't girls, but that never stopped me. It was never a conversation in my head. I did everything I could as a kid, played all the youth sports. And I like to say that I grew up in the golden age of youth sports when the opportunities were plentiful, but there was no overwhelming sports as a business to twist the narrative. And I was really, really lucky. When I was in fourth grade, I had, if you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, I had a very bad soccer birthday. I'm born in December. So I was playing with kids who were in fifth and sixth grade when I was in fourth grade. And I got put on the third team of athletes. And at this point, they didn't reduce the number of players and field sizes. So I was maybe like the 45th to 60th worst player in my town. But nobody told me. I was blissfully unaware. I got to just play because it was fun, and that fun turned into a passion and an obsession, and I loved sports, and I played 3 sports in high school, but most of my energy was focused on soccer at the time. Considering college was sort of between soccer and lacrosse, but I think in my heart, I ultimately knew soccer was what I wanted to pursue and chose to go to Columbia and was able to have a very successful career then, because when I was 10, I just was able to play for the fun, and I had an awesome environment, and it was pure love and no added interests. So I was really lucky.
I think that our ultimate goal here is to create 20,000 more Tosh Adamses out there, those who just fall in love with sports in general at 10 years old and just pursue it, blissfully unaware, as you said. I think that's our job. Will you tell us a little bit about your work as a one-on-one mental coach?
Yeah, so I have been working with athletes on mental performance skills. And in my mind, this is sort of like the new wave. And I think that more and more athletes are going to understand that there is so much untapped potential in building those skill sets, because everything that you can do with mental performance is a trainable skill, just like being able to use both hands in lacrosse. And so I help athletes build up that skill set and to do it in a way that works for them and their needs, and all the time, building the confidence they need to literally become the competitor that they were meant to be. And I feel for kids now, there is so much pressure on them. And they didn't get to grow up in the golden age of youth sports and to just play for fun. So I really try to create an environment where they can focus on the fun, even with all the work that they're doing.
Sure, fantastic. We're going to talk so much more about all of this. I think that develops nicely into our theme today of youth athletes, the mental aspect. We'll talk about the physical aspects as well, the differences. Before I do that, I have a fun icebreaker for all of us. Usually it's on topic, but today I'm really excited that we have a very South Shore centric podcast here. I know someday we're going to get to Malcolm Gladwell numbers in terms of podcast. And so this will go far, far, far away. But for right now, it's small, and we have Quincy, we have Situate and Duxbury. So very quickly, your favorite bar pizza.
I'm gonna have to go with Stoked, which is more of a restaurant bar, but I have celiac and they make an unbelievable gluten-free pizza. The atmosphere reminds me of like the bottom of church when I was a kid, like where the CYO events are. It's a very like old school vintage, no frills kind of place, but it's fantastic. It's on 3A in Cohasset.
Oh, love that. Martin, how about you? Quincy
Wood
guy.
fired.
Well, I never ventured too far out of Quincy growing up. I was always within walking distance with my restaurant picks. So I got to go with Copeland Street Pizza. I'm a huge Buffalo Chicken Pizza fan, so they just got it done for me. Copeland Street.
Very good. I always go the classic Cape Cod out of Brockton. They always have them in the freezers too. But a local place for me is West End Cafe in Kingston. You have to ask for the pizza menu, like off menu, which is great. But they do a Reuben one with pastrami, little drizzled Thousand Island. It's to die for. And now we're all salivating. And what an amazing segue to talk about sports now as a non sequitur. But anyways, thank you for that. For those of you in the North Shore, all my friends from Peabody and North Andover, don't worry, we're going to get you on. We're going to talk about your big beef three-way order. But for right now, we're going to turn our attention to sports again. I'd love for it to someday become another golden age of sports. I think that we're taking our steps on our end to try to keep this in perspective, keep this fun as best as we can. But it feels like we're uphill, doesn't it?
It does. It does. But there's pockets of organizations out there. I work with coaches and train coaches, and I've been running a workshop recently called Coaching the Whole Athlete. And the more you have these conversations and the more you get in front of people, we all want the same thing. It's just there's so much noise out there that it's really hard to distill it down and then to figure out how to do that. And we also, as volunteer coaches, have so much on our plates that unless we're super intentional, it's really easy to fall back into our routines and habits. And it is an uphill battle, but I'm very faithful that we can get there.
Oh, I love your optimism. Martin, what do you think about that?
I saw a quote by Michael Jordan recently, and he was talking about how he didn't really get coached until he was about 16 years old. And he's a firm believer in play now, learn later. And I think we would benefit as a society by prioritizing that within youth sports is more play, more games, just prioritizing having fun and learning how to just love the game and not really worry too much about teaching techniques and strategies so much. And that developmentally, it doesn't really benefit us too much at these younger ages. Is we just want to be having fun, and I think that's the environment that Mass Youth Lacrosse is trying to create. And yeah, it does feel like an uphill battle, but we're up for the challenge.
Amen, we are. So let's start off with our discussion here. This is casual, so anybody answer and throw out other questions of your own. But I'm not even going to ask this as a rhetorical. What are there differences between youth and high school? There are. Let's just skip right to it. Accept that premise as gospel and ask the question, what are they? So what are some of the obvious differences between having a child youth athlete, K through 8, and somebody who's 9 through 12? Martin, you start.
Sure. I would start by even highlighting the differences, let's say from K through 4 to 5th through 8th. I think by the time you get into 5th and 6th grade, that thought of high school is there, where that doesn't even exist in K through 4. One of the things that I've come to accept, and I try to remind coaches of, is a lot of times youth athletes didn't necessarily sign themselves up. And so part of our job is to like garner excitement and create some environment where all of a sudden they want to be there. They didn't even realize they did, but now they do because they have a coach who's creating a fun environment. So that's part of the challenge with youth sports that maybe doesn't exist as much in high school. By the time they get there, they probably chose to do that during that season. And maybe you still get the people that aren't as bought in, but it's just a little bit fewer and far between. And so I try to encourage coaches to just accept that truth that some kids are there because their parents needed babysitting for those after school hours, and that's okay. But it's still possible to get those kids excited and to get them bought into what we're trying to do, which is have fun.
Tosh, what's your gut to this question?
Yeah, I love that. I fully agree. And one of the big differences at high school is the buy-in, and that you have a group of athletes who are choosing to be there, and they might be making that choice over other things. And what is asked of them is more. It's much more of a commitment. So they're there, 5, 6 days a week, depending upon their sport. And for that season, it's their identity. They're a field hockey player, they're a lacrosse player, they're a football player, and they're all in, and that's their social scene and the dynamics around that. And for the most part, their attention is not divided. You might have like an off-season sport that somebody plays that's not their primary, and they've got to manage their club commitments, maybe on weekends and in parts, but they're focused on that particular sport. And I think as youth coaches, we're taking in a bunch of kids who have divided priorities. They're playing baseball, they're playing soccer, they're playing club soccer and lacrosse all at the same time. And like Martin said, some of them are there because their parents want them to be there. Whereas in high school, that's different. So the load is also a lot higher on their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the other major difference is that it's an athlete-driven process, and all the communication from coaches goes directly to that athlete, and the athlete has to be accountable for managing everything that's on their plate and their workload and their time and their schedule. And parents can't get out the Zamboni and clear the way for them. So it's a big difference, and a lot of parents, when they first go through it, it's a little bit of a shock to the system for them.
So I want to talk again about the physical aspect. Again, we kind of mentioned it, but before I do so, Martin, you kind of said something that triggered something in me. You talked about the difference between K-4 and then 5-8. And for me, that is one of the major differences, is that we get them for 9 years. Most youth programs, have K program. Those who don't, still, it's 8. That's a long time. And the transition in themselves is so drastic from level to level. I mean, yes, there is a difference between a freshman and a high school senior, but it really is kind of a homogenous group when you look at high schoolers compared to what we get as youth coaches, especially those involved with leadership, where we're kind of responsible for everyone. And we talked a little bit a few weeks ago about the development plan on the whole, but we're getting kids as they are changing in front of us. And one thing that's amazing as an opportunity as a youth coach is we have a small hand. Obviously, the parents do, the teachers do, any religious affiliation helping to shape their morals. But from an athletic perspective and the lessons we can teach through sports, we have a hand in shaping them as well along their way, and kind of a big obligation.
I agree. And I think, just to highlight what you're alluding to with this 8-year, 9-year window, I also think even from, like, let's say 3rd grade to 5th grade, I mean, those are drastic differences in their development athletically. And let's say if you're coaching a 3-4 girls team, you might have an athlete who's 5-6 inches taller than someone else, and like significantly faster and significantly better with hand-eye coordination. And that's one of the biggest challenges, as we've mentioned in the past, is teaching to that varying degree of athletic ability and skill set and bought-in factor. And I think that's why youth coaching is arguably much more challenging, maybe one of the most challenging coaching positions, because man, what a tough environment in some sense to be able to appropriately challenge that varying degree of athleticism and skill at the youth level. And I always am trying to thank coaches for doing this work, because it's as you alluded to, it's incredibly influential on these developing minds.
Tosh, you
Yeah.
talked about the workload of the high schooler and what we can throw at them. So, how does that change for youth? And so, for maybe put it in the perspective of a high school coach who's coming down and giving a little time at the youth, what changes can we expect in terms of how long our practices are, how long our drills, the intensity level, the physical aspects that we have to kind of remind ourselves when we're dealing with a 10-year-old versus an 18-year-old?
Sure. I mean, there's so many reasons why it's harder to coach at the youth level than it is high school, and I do both right now. Um, I would say the development gap that you have at the youth ages is so much bigger. Physical development being one of them, but even the actual skill development. And that's a really hard thing to manage. But to answer your question, Joey, about what types of changes they can expect in terms of time and intensity. So, at the end of the day, a coach's job is the same. And I know we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but break it down to first principles. Like, our job is to help the human in front of us and give them the opportunity that they have to be successful in life. And lucky us that we get to use sports as a vehicle to do that. And everybody in media and in the news, they will talk about how athletes are naturally imbued with leadership and teamwork, and they understand how to be good leaders. And all of those things are true and can be byproducts of sports, but not unless coaches are intentional. And I think if you are a coach who's used to coaching high school and you're coming down to coach a youth program, you have to understand that that development gap is really big, and it's your job to coach all the athletes in front of you. So, one, that does change the level of intensity. It changes the length of practice to a certain extent. I do think eighth graders can handle a 2-hour practice. But obviously, if you're, coaching younger kids, it's an hour for really little and maybe 90 minutes, and you work your way up. Um, but you have to also recognize that you're developing each individual to the best that you can get out of them. Whereas, yes, that's the goal in high school, but high school, there's more emphasis on the team outcome. And you are moving players around sometimes, like in a chess match, because you want the best team to put forward against your next opponent, because your outcome and who you play and your success matters a lot. At the youth level, it matters to some coaches. To me, it does not matter. I want to make sure that I am developing every individual athlete to the best that they can be. And if the outcome collectively is a win, that's fantastic. If it's not, that is okay. Not everybody subscribes to that belief, but I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer your
Sure,
question?
absolutely.
Okay.
Marty, anything to add to that in terms of practice length, or what we expect? Let me phrase this one for you differently. We get our kids like twice a week, whereas a varsity coach might have 5 days, 2 hours. That's a lot of time to work skill, stick stuff. Obviously the team components. A lot of times when I'm coaching my teams, we say, yeah, we have you for two times 75 to 90 minutes, but you have to do work outside. You have to work on your wall ball. You have to work on cradling. So what kind of an impact does that have on the youth, especially when, as Tosh mentioned, they have baseball and softball, not to mention art class, music, all the homework that they may have. You only listed a small array of sports, Tosh. These kids have so much on their plate. How can we expect them also to keep up with things like a wall ball routine?
Sure. I'll say two things. One is in-person garnering excitement. At the youth level, it is almost encouraged, if not required, to learn how to, make animal noises built into your drills, and, turning any simple task into a game, a form of a game, and adding the points, and, creating that excitement around just the simplest of things is critical, right? Getting that excitement is it's such a challenge. I think of a coach like Matt Belson with Scoops Lacrosse, who's mastered this, and I learned so much about that because I kind of bounce around, similar to you, Tosh, to coaching different levels. And I've coached at the pro level, I've coached at the college level. And I can sort of kind of forget where I am sometimes and be like, looking for that effort, but in a state of mind of like more like a drill sergeant. It's like, no. You got to be, all about having fun and understanding how to pull that out of kids. And they're ready to make animal noises. You just got to ask them to do it. And the change of energy is incredible. So that's one thing. Two is in regards to, we have them for less amount of time on a weekly basis. If you can add, let's say, a wall ball routine, if that can turn into its own game where there's some sort of prize or some sort of glory in coming back with a sheet that has a box checked off, or the proof in how efficient your stick work is, that in itself is its own art, is to just get a little bit of effort outside of practice. I hear coaches say a lot of times, like, practice is for team stuff, the individual stuff is for on your own. I don't necessarily fully agree with that. I think it's a great theory. But as I've mentioned in the past, you're always going to start with stick work at every level. That's just how you start lacrosse practice. And so that is an ongoing question. I don't have it down by any means, but if you can figure out a way to get your kids with a stick in their hands outside of practice, you found some magic sauce. So if anyone out there has got great ideas for that, please let us know.
Let's talk for a second about some of the emotional differences between the youth athlete and the high school athlete. And what does it mean, say, like handling adversity, right? Putting things into perspective, how they handle losses, how they handle victories, etc. Tosh, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. I mean, in an ideal world, you have had the reps, you've had your moments of adversity, and your parents have not removed all the obstacles during your youth program so that you have the ability to handle those things. In practice, right now, I'm not seeing that is true for all athletes. And we talked about our job bringing it back to the golden age of youth sports. And also, a lot of this has to do with educating parents on this. And I do not have a sociology or anthropology background, but I understand why parents act the way they act. It's very primal in my experience, because we are wired genetically to have our offspring survive, and we want to secure resources for that to happen. And they see playing time and X team and all-star games as the resources that are going to help their offspring be successful. And then if you add in like the tribal mentality, if we want to fit in, then this, like, any sort of bad behavior is contagious. And parents are literally acting in a way that they think is in their kids' best interest because they don't want them to fail. None of us do. It's super uncomfortable to watch our kids fail. Like, it is really hard. But the more that we can do that when the stakes are low, like if your kids forget their stuff, like they're going to be letting their team down. That's a really uncomfortable process, but do not bail them out of that situation. I'm not saying when they're in fourth grade, but by the time they're seventh, eighth grade, don't bail them out. Like, let them face uncomfortable consequences. So when they get to high school, don't email coaches about playing time. Don't try to get them on teams if they don't make it. Because I work with high school athletes who have been devastated to not make teams and have been crying on sidelines because they didn't get playing time, like in front of their teams. And that's not a mentally resilient athlete. I have full faith that I can get that kid to a place where they can handle those things, but ultimately we want to give our kids more practice with those things so that by the time they get to high school, they're ready to handle that thing, those hard moments.
We briefly interrupt this episode to remind you all about the New England Youth Lacrosse Convention. This upcoming convention is the 4th annual. We'll be hosting at Gillette Stadium, and we're super excited. The date for that is February 1st, and we'll be welcoming coaches from all around the country with tons of different speakers and vendors joining us. We hope you'll join us too. Please check out the Instagram page for more information and to gather tickets as well. That's NE Youth LaxCon on Instagram. One more time, that's NE Youth LaxCon on Instagram. Hope to see you there.
Tosh, in your opinion, and I know you're not a sociologist officially, you have amazing answers and perspective, but what changed with the parents? because we're all roughly the same age. We all kind of grew up in that, as we've been calling it, the golden age. And sure, I recall there being a parent or two really intense on the sideline, really going after the coaches about playing time. But generally speaking, overall, they kind of did let it go a little bit more. So what happened over the last 20 years?
Oh, this is a really big question. Um, I think there's many reasons, and the awareness of other people's successes, I think, is a huge factor. The everyone gets a trophy mentality, I do think, is a factor. And this sort of helicopter parenting that we have seen. Why all of those things? I think it's a little bit of a perfect storm, and sports is not the only environment where we're seeing this. I mean, you
Right.
see it in the college application process, you see it in, kids going to elite music schools, and it's permeated every aspect of culture right now. I don't have a great answer as to like the real origin of this. Um, but I think a lot has changed. And I do think the way that we raise kids has changed
And
from.
even if we don't have the answers to it, we at least kind of figuring out the symptoms of it helps us as coaches to kind of understand. And you said it earlier too. It's like I understand where the parents are coming from. I might
Mhm.
not like it. It might not be what's best for me and the team, but at least I know where they're coming from as they're kind of protecting, their children. So Marty, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's complicated. And to bring it back to your original question about sort of the emotional differences, I think it's important for coaches to sort of expect to some degree. In my experience, I've seen a hard change in the emotional capacity and the behavior of kids at middle school. So let's really by seventh grade for sure. And to me, the way I define it is they become more aware that their peers are paying attention to them, and I think that that's something that we need to be ready for as coaches. It almost makes, in some sense, those younger ages in this particular topic easier to manage because, at a certain age, those younger ages, these kids will look ridiculous and try hard and fall on their face, and they just kind of get up and keep going. And it's like, it's a non issue. And at a certain point, they fall on their face and they look around and go, oh my God, who saw me? And so that becomes, I think, a unique challenge that follows kids into high school. And as you kind of started to mention, Tosh, by the time they get into high school, the hope would be that they've experienced that enough times that their self-talk doesn't tell them how bad they are because of one mistake. And this is something I struggled with, and I think a lot of athletes that actually did make it to high level struggle with, is that we're our own worst enemy. One mistake can turn into really, really bad thought loops. And I had to really, really develop the skill set of accepting failures as learning opportunities and not allowing that to define my worth, which is an advanced idea, but it starts to stem at that middle school age. And I think that coaches can get ahead of that. And it's an important concept for us as youth coaches to be like ready for that. Oh my God, these kids are starting to really like worry about who's watching them. And I think it's also uh, an opportunity for kids to start not trying their hardest to sort of avoid making mistakes. And that's where I see we can really do good work as youth coaches is encourage those mistakes. Like that's good. I want you to go so hard that you fall on your face and like cheer that on. And I think kids get caught off guard by that, but they respond well ultimately.
And so, lastly, why don't we? Because I'd like to move on from just explaining the differences, or at least acknowledging what they are. But just let's talk a little bit about the cognitive differences between youth and high school. And I'm talking about the way maybe that they process information, how they learn new things, maybe how they handle the corrections that we kind of give them as coaches in our teaching methods, how they memorize complex systems, for example. So let's expand on that a little bit.
Um, in my experience, I don't believe the way that they process information changes dramatically. I always tell coaches when I'm working, you need to understand that the way any individual processes information is different. The three of us here all take things in differently. And I always try to um, make sure that they are told, shown, and do. And some athletes, you can say, hey, we're going to line up. We're going to put these three cones over here. I want the first person through to make a cut, asking for the ball, but not get it. I want you to pass across, right? And that first athlete's like, yep, I know exactly what she's saying. I got it. I'm in. The second one needs to see somebody else do it. And then that third type of athlete needs to go through all three steps. They need to hear it, they need to watch it, and then they need to do it. And you need to recognize that it's not like your athletes aren't listening if they don't get it at the beginning. They're just processing information in different ways. So give it to them in different ways and be super patient. And if they don't get something, I always tell my teams this. I'm like, look, girls, if you're not getting this, it's on me. Like I've not complained this. So let's everybody stop and then we try again. And I think as coaches, sometimes our ego gets in the way of that. And we think maybe, they're not listening. But I think if we can hold the mirror up a little bit, that helps. But to answer your question specifically, I don't think how they process the information changes, but what they are required to process is a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive load is just higher in high school because you're not just taking in skill sets and a few simple cuts. You're learning plays, you're learning to read defenses and offenses, understanding your different teammates, how they operate, and what their signals are telling you about where to be and how to best support them. So I think there's a big incline as far as like a learning curve in getting to high school and playing most high school sports because of that.
Agreed. My difference in cognitive ability as far as how I coach it differently, I think I lean more towards the do, as to put in your terms, Tosh. At the youth level, if I have some expectation, let's say as an example, one of the most common issues of skills to teach at youth lacrosse is off ball movement. If I'm going and I'm bringing in my group because we're playing a scrimmage type game, and I just go, all right, I want everyone to cut more often. If I have the expectation that that's going to really land and everyone's going to start doing it, I think I'm a little naive. Where at the high school level, I think I can sort of ask that. I think I can say, hey, I want you to everyone look at me in the eyes, and I want you to look at me. Cut more often. You think you can do that? Get a couple of yeses. I think I'll get more cutting. Whereas at the youth level, a practical tool I give to coaches is implementing a 3-second rule. I know in certain levels that we have like a pass rule. You got to make X amount of passes. And I think that can be helpful, but it's also, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but just to give that example more context, they can just have the two best players play catch it back and forth, and then they run through everybody, and it doesn't really solve the problem of like playing the team sport the way we know that it can be played. Whereas the 3-second rule, as players understand, I can only have the ball on my stick for 3 seconds, there's a ripple effect that their teammates go, I got to get open. And so all I've done is now create a rule that changes the environment. And then as I see off-ball movement, now I'm going encouragement, high fives, I clap my hands when I see those cuts, as opposed to just asking for it up front. So I think that's more of the challenge at the youth level from a coaching perspective is what can you throw at them from a environmental or rules-based approach that just creates the outcome of what you're trying to get, as opposed to just asking for it and then having some expectation that they're going to hear you.
Absolutely. And so that's kind of a nice segue to, we've been talking a lot about these individual players, but putting them together as a team, do our goals change? Are the goals of a youth team different than that of a high school team?
In
Either
my
of you.
mind, yeah, in my
Yeah.
mind, yes. Um, as a coach, you're always development focused, but the emphasis on development for the individual is greater at the youth level than it is at the high school level. And you might look at your athletes in high school and move them around positionally to make the best whole in a way that may not be the best move for a particular individual. Because you're trying to come up with the best sum of the parts that you can come up. So I think the goals are a little bit different in that sense. And there is more emphasis on outcome. I'm a big process over outcome person in everything. And that's a huge part of what we teach and the mental skills. But for a high school team, it is very much outcome focused because you need to have the right record and you need to have the right power ranking to get to the tournament and to be successful. And I think you can be very mindful and manage both of those things equally, but you can't deny the fact that the outcome's important. It absolutely is.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there's a stark difference in youth lacrosse. If I can just get consistent effort and people having fun, that's success. Whereas when you get to that high school level, as you're mentioning, like we need to see that growth. We need to see you executing at a higher level on a weekly basis, that things are improving. And as you're alluding to, the behavior-based goals are more important than those outcome-based goals. However, if we're really, really focusing on those behavior-based goals, you will get those outcomes. And so you can start to connect those dots at the high school level. Not to say that you can at the youth. I just think it's less of a priority. So, especially for us, town-based youth lacrosse, let's exclude select for a moment. For the classic level in our case, we just want to see people having fun and giving effort. And I think that's vastly different from a high school approach where you're really trying to win games. And that's an important part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Joey.
No. This is fabulous. What's occurring to me is as we're talking through, and this is especially true when you have a high school coach that has some tenure. They've been there for a while, but either way, there's not much of a personal journey for them. They kind of are very familiar with this particular age level, whereas most youth coaches like myself and you, Tosh, were parents. So we kind of make that journey with the kids. We kind of start with them in first grade and we go all the way through eighth. So as they're changing, so are we. Whereas a high school coach kind of knows what the emotional, the cognitive, and the physical expectations of the high school athlete looks like. So what, in your opinion, is a good strategy for town leaders to find more stability, like getting coaches, having parent. We're not at all suggesting that parent coaches aren't going to continue to be and should be in a really major part of town lacrosse. I fully believe that, but I like the idea of having also some stability in there, having a fifth and sixth grade coach, when maybe it's on your select team, that's consistent with that level year to year, knows these kids, knows what to expect, knows what they're coming from, where they're going to. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a pretty cool concept to think about. And I did a training for MYL a couple of years ago on coaching the middle school athlete. And one of the coaches in the audience said exactly this. It's like by the time you figure out the age that you're coaching, you're moving on to the next one. And unless you've got, multiple kids that you're bringing up through these levels over time, you're evolving and developing as you go along. The concept of having a fifth and sixth grade coach who's that's their sweet spot, they understand, or seventh and eighth, I think that's good in theory, and it's probably possible in practice, especially in a pretty dense lacrosse community where you have people who'd be willing to do that, even if they don't have a kid in the program. Yeah.
Sure.
I like the idea, Joey. It's going to be tough, especially for these volunteer coaches. My boys are only 3 years old, so we'll see how I respond. I'm sure I'm going to want to stick with them all the way through.
Yeah, of course.
But I like the idea. I think maybe at the select level, it's possible, right? Having someone that's sort of committed to that and it's a little bit more serious. So, yeah. And I'd also, one of my thoughts is, as you were answering that, Tosh, is if there are coaches out there listening to this that are like, I have mastered 3-4, let us know, reach out to us.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned, right? We are here as colleagues to all these coaches out there that have a ton of experience. So I kind of put that as a call to action to those out there listening that might have strong opinions on how to maximize things for certain age groups, let us know.
So for both of you, but I'm going to gear this one towards Tosh a little bit. We've just barely scratched the surface on discussing and talking about these differences, but I like to be practical as best we can. So for a coach who's all in on the youth experience and they buy into this and we want to properly transition these kids and get them ready for the next level. So really, I'm kind of talking about the middle school age level here. What are some tips that we can use as youth coaches that are going to help them get from that model in which we, the adults, the parents and the coaches, are kind of shaping that experience for them, to one that, as you described it, as being athlete driven? What are some tips here for that?
I think this is true for any coaches. Is one, you got to know your stakeholders, right? So in this case, as a coach, it's parents and athletes, and obviously your board and the league. And two, you have to expectation set. And I always tell coaches, expectation setting is an ongoing job. You are never done with it. You do it at the beginning of a season, you do it with your parents, you do it with your athletes, you do it at the beginning of a session, you do it at the beginning of an activity, at the beginning of a game, at a timeout, at a halftime, all the things. You're always letting them know what the expectations are. And as athletes work their way into 7th and 8th grade, you communicate those expectations to them very clearly. You tell them that they are accountable for their equipment. It's, they need to have all of their stuff there. Whether or not athletes are on time when they're that age is really hard because they don't drive themselves to practice. So I always try to tell coaches not to penalize the athlete when that is so out of their control. Most of the time, their equipment is in their control. You do run into the parents or the kids who have 2 different houses to go to, and that becomes an issue. But for the most part, making sure the kids manage their things, having really high standards, and holding your kids to those standards consistently, and then providing them opportunities to be a leader and to be uncomfortable. So specifically for MYL, right, you have kids trying out for select teams. We in Situate encourage everybody to go to tryouts. We almost require it. And tryouts have evaluators that are not coaches and not parents of those kids. And, there's people walking around with clipboards and they wear a tryout penny and it's under the lights. And so the stakes are high for those kids. It's kind of an intimidating environment, but it's practice. They will be in that, whether they're auditioning for a play or for Model UN or they're trying out for football or whatever it is. And it's uncomfortable. The other thing is give every athlete an opportunity to be a leader. As coaches, it's very easy to go for those most vocal or most talented players. But if you can give every opportunity or every athlete say, all right, you two are responsible for running warm-ups for this practice and the game on Sunday. And they're in charge of leading their team. Some kids are going to think it's awesome and they're going to be all over being in charge. Other kids will be like, are you serious? You want me to do that? And you just give them the opportunity to flex that leadership muscle and to be uncomfortable. And the third piece I would say is if there is communication that needs to happen with coaches, talk to the parents. All of these conversations have to happen with parents too, and let the athlete come to coach. I want to ask about playing a different position. I'm a little just have questions about playing time or whatever it is. Let the athlete manage those conversations. Don't let a parent email and advocate for them. So just give them those little opportunities, and you're educating the parents on why you're doing this and helping them through this process as well. And you got to be empathetic too. We have to recognize that it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to let go. And these are our babies and we birth them and raise them and all the things. And let them know when they get to high school, sometimes you will have zero communication from coaches. None. And you're texting other parents because you don't know what time you're supposed to get your kid there or pick them up. And it's no, that's on you. Your athlete has to figure that stuff out and find it out. And it can be a shock if they don't have those little opportunities to practice.
Marty, before you answer this, I just want to follow up really quickly, Tosh. You talked about constantly changing articulating the expectations, the standards. Easy with the players because we're with them. We can do it at a timeout. We can have them at practice. We can huddle up and express ourselves. How do you do it with the parents? Are you holding in-person meetings? Are you gathering them after a game? Are you just kind of blasting out an email? Hey, I've noticed this. I'd like to talk to you about this. Talk to me a little bit about your communication ideas with the parents.
So I think you are best served, in my experience, to have an in-person meeting at first and make it easy. Do it like, hey, when you guys are coming to pick up your kids from this first practice, come 20 minutes early. Let one coach be on the field doing the rest of practice, and that coach meets with parents. And then you set the expectations about future communication, because we're all so busy. We have so many emails and so many apps and so many different sports communication tools. It literally makes your head explode. And if you say, look, I'm going to send out communication on Wednesdays or whatever day, and I'm going to communicate through Demisphere, and this is what I need you to RSVP, whether or not your kid can be there, so I know. And then you just keep up with that communication. With parents, you're not doing it for every practice, but it's weekly. It's weekly. Like, this is the game. We're low on players. We may be asking boys to play in 2 games. We can help with rides, whatever it is. And then when you have that first meeting, you let them know what your standards are as a coach, what you're looking for from your athletes and these kids, and that we're trying to get them ready for that next level. We want to get them ready for high school. So we're going to partner with you to help them be successful. And that means that if they show up without their stick, well, they're going to be the helper coach, and they can run and shag balls, but don't come bring their stick 20 minutes into practice. Like, let them feel that pain. All that stuff.
Love that. Marty, anything to add to that?
Love it. I got nothing to add. It's fantastic.
I want to throw in something that you mentioned, and it's just another example of coaches helping coaches. This is not even my original idea. I think that the folks at HGR mentioned this in one of their coaching seminars. They said if you do have kind of an attendance or a tardiness problem, and again, Tosh, you nailed it. You cannot hold the kid responsible because their parent is the one driving them. But if it's kind of a repeat thing, do something really fun at the beginning of your practice. A can't miss. Doesn't even have to be lacrosse related, just a game, so that those kids tell their parents, you got to get me there in time. We have to get there 10 minutes early. I'm not going to miss when they do, tag or whatever it might be. I thought that was great advice, and I used that myself. So I just wanted to throw that in and share it. One last question before we jump into the Q&A part from outside coaches is we're talking about preparing these kids. We've kind of directed the last few minutes of this about kind of the middle schooler. So sticking with that, what are some signs and symptoms that we may be doing that a little too far, too fast? That shift, and that we kind of have to pause and say, all right, they're not ready for that yet. They're youth. We got to remind ourselves of that.
As coaches? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, as coaches, when are we pushing them a little far? What are we looking for signs and symptoms that the 8th graders, we're maybe holding them to too high a standard?
Yeah, Martin mentioned this at the beginning, like when you're transitioning and shifting gears. And I know I've come from like a varsity playoff game to a town practice, and I'm just like, so you've got to set yourself. I think I didn't listen to your full podcast yet. I'm going to, but you talked about the energy beforehand, right? And I always tell coaches, like, you got to hype yourself up, like listen to your playlist going in. You also have to center yourself around who you're coaching and what their needs are. And when your athletes are giving you, like, you're not getting smiles and it's not fun, like, because you can smile when things are hard, but if they're like uncomfortable, they're muttering under their breath, talking to each other, they're not smiling, they're not really locking eyes with you at the end of the session, like, and that's your pulse that maybe something's a little bit off, and you got to self-assess.
Terrific.
Yeah, I would say it's in the eyes. You can see, I know I've experienced this, is like the just looking away, like they know I'm talking to them and they're just like avoiding the eye contact, and I'm like, oh man. And one thing that I wish I started doing earlier is like giving authentic apologies, and like, hey, I came in spicy hot today, and I just want you guys to know that my ultimate goal is for you to have fun, and my energy for the last 10 minutes was not helpful for that. And for that, I am sorry. However, I noticed that we're not doing this, this, and this. Do you guys think we can work together on this? I think there's an easy repair process that can be helpful, and authenticity goes a long way, especially with apologies. I think it's true in coaching. I think it's true in parenting, and it can be powerful for a young mind to hear an adult authentically apologize.
Sure, because we're the role models. We talked about that. We're setting the scene that mistakes are not only going to happen, but we need them to happen for us to grow. So, what better way for us to show that than by having our own accountability? So, I love that you said that, Martin. And Tosh, you said something similar. If the girls aren't grasping it, that's on me. I got to reset. I got to rethink the way that I'm explaining it and showing it and demonstrating it. And so that's just a spot on mentality that all coaches should come into, with the idea that I'm not infallible, right? I'm here to lead. I'm here to advise, to coach, to teach, but I'm going to make tons of mistakes along the way, and we're all going to do it together. And because of that, we're all going to get better, right? And before we answer some questions that some coaches gave us, is there anything else on this topic I wasn't able to pull that you want to mention as it relates to youth versus high school? I think you guys did a great job, but just in case I didn't set you up for something, let me know.
I would chime in with one concept. I mentioned it in a briefly on a previous episode, but we know that parents of athletes that succeed are less vocal on the sidelines of games. And I think, like in the topic of setting expectations and having those meetings with parents, hopefully it's in person, but maybe it's just an email, maybe it's a Zoom meeting, but regardless of, like, at least putting that out there, that it can be very confusing for kids to constantly hear their parent from the sideline, and for them to understand that we are taking away a decision making moment by shouting out, pass it, shoot it. Like, we're trying to be helpful. We're excited. We're engaged as parents on the sidelines. But if you understand that you're actually taking those opportunities away, by the time they get to high school, they've had less decision making moments. And so I would really encourage parents out there to not talk so much on the sidelines. Easier said than done. And for coaches out there to try to relay that message of, we want our kids to be making these decisions, whether it's the right or wrong one. It's still beneficial for them to make that on their own.
So how, Marty? Because it's a really hard thing for a young coach who's a peer to these parents, by the way, to say, hey, gather around, everybody. I really need you all to shut up for this game. So tell us a good way of broaching that. You kind of already have, but just one more time, just walk us through how we could articulate to the parents without ruffling feathers.
Sure. I think in person is the best, as Tosh mentioned. If we can share the experience of what has been studied quite literally, that athletes that excel in high school, college, professional ranks have parents who are more calm on the sidelines. And the reason behind that, my fellow parents, is because they are allowed to make their own decisions. And as engaged as I know you are, I all want you here on the sidelines. I want you to be excited. I want you to be clapping. But every time you bark out a command, you take away that opportunity for them to make their own decisions. So I really encourage you to do your best to allow your athletes to make their own decisions. And I think we're all going to have a better experience because of that. If you're out there shouting and hollering, you know what? It's okay. We all make mistakes, but I may give you a phone call or an email later because we did talk about this. And my hope is that you guys know that I want what's best for your kids and that you trust me in this process.
I think that's super manageable. I think that's an easy way to do that. I love that. I'm going to do that myself. You know what helps is when it comes from the league as well. And I don't know if this is a national soccer thing or like mass youth soccer, but they have something called Silent September, and they blasted out in an email and said for the month of September, all of these games, the parents aren't going to say a word. You're just going to clap and you're going to pick your kid up. And it comes from like, the administration. It comes from a higher power there. We're in the spring, and I haven't been able to put the onomatopoeia together or the alliteration to figure out, May and April, what we could do to silence the parents. But once we figure that out, we'll do that at a league level.
I love it.
Sounds good
to
me.
Anything else that you'd like to add?
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Martin. I've done an Instagram post on that exact topic, and it's the robbing of the decision-making process. It's literally developmental need that kids need to go through, not to mention that they're actually trying to manage a skill and make a decision at the same time. So they're receiving a ball, catching it, putting it into their stick, putting their body in a protective position at the same time that they're trying to decide what is their next step in their next process. And when they have somebody in their ear interfering, it just makes it so much harder to do that. I do think from an administrative perspective that that's communication that can come from your board of directors too. There was a time where Situate Youth Lacrosse would do a Zoom for all parents at the beginning of a season and set expectations around all of those things. And, you know, like coaches fall into our habits, parents do too. And it's really hard to change behavior. But yeah, I think just educating, the more we can get these messages out there, the better.
But to your point, you have to try, right? You can't just
Yeah.
say, well, they're never going to get it. At least you have to put that out there. And then you can come back and say, we talked about, you know, the team behavior, expectations, sidelines, all that. You have to try. So, you know, God bless for doing it. And this has been great. So we have a couple of questions, and this is for any of us to answer, because we're going to eventually, I promise, have some live episodes that we're going to tape, and we're going to take these questions in the chat room in real time. But in the meantime, for these pre-recorded ones, we've kind of asked some of our friends and colleagues to give us some on-topic questions. So we have a few I'm going to read out here. Here's the first one. I'm someone who started the game later in life, and in parentheses, they wrote high school, and have been really, I've never really been around the sport at the youngest levels. Now that my son is a first grader, I'm going to be coaching town lacrosse this spring for the first time, and I'm looking for realistic expectations. Top tips.
Number one, learn their names. Know their names, use their names. Like you saying, hey, you, hey, everybody, has such minimal impact compared to saying, hey, Martin, the way that you just held your stick was awesome. Good work, buddy. High five, right? When we use people's names, they filter that information way different. They begin to trust us. They take that feedback. And my second tip, coaching first grade, keep it fun. Expectation set, get a lot of help, but give those people jobs, because you can't just have a bunch of adults on the sideline or in the field talking. Give them very specific jobs to help you out and make the process smoother.
Tosh, let me ask you this before I let Marty answer that one. On the boys' side, it's a little easier. We can put tape on their helmets. Not so easy on the girls' side, but I've seen some towns do name tags.
Tape on the penny, name tags. Yeah.
Perfect. Because
Yeah.
that always helps the coaches in real time. It's, you know, really hard to memorize, but if you can constantly have reminders and see it, then you'll start to do that. That's an amazing tip. Marty, how about you?
Well, I am obligated to give my top tip as please check out our learning management software that we created for Massachusetts Youth Lacrosse members, and that is going to be available very soon for all youth lacrosse coaches. It's called Learn to Coach Lax, hosted on a platform called Lightspeed VT, VT standing for virtual training. And we're really excited. It's catered towards really K through 4, but I think coaches of all levels, including even high school coaches, will get value from it. So that's where I would send coaches if they are looking to hone their skill set and really, you know, create a foundation of what to do, where to start. Go check that out.
And I would say while you're on there, look up ground ball drills, because I think your expectation is going to be, oh, we're going to be able to pass it around and, you know, the 3 times before somebody trigger a dodge.
Right.
And however long you think the ball is going to be on the ground, it's 10 times that.
Yeah.
So focus on ground balls and you're going to be great, because it's all about possession at this level, isn't it? Here's number 2. If there is one, what would be a good conversion rate for middle schoolers compared to high schoolers? And for example, and I'm glad there's a for example, because I didn't quite get this at first. If our high school team does 100 wall reps as part of their routine, what should a middle schooler be assigned? So let's start with this. Is there a conversion rate, or you know, should middle schoolers be able to do? And I think 100 is light, by the way. But I think that's as an example.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think you could even go pretty granular with this one. Say like a particular for 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think at the high school level, let's say, okay, 100 wall ball reps. I like to do it in a timed fashion, so I can really know what is sort of we'll call it elite level stick work. You should be able to get 1 rep per second. And as you get to even higher levels, you can do more. You can do more than 60 reps in 1 minute with kind of really efficient stick work. And so if I'm going all the way down to a basic 1-2, I think you could probably cut that into a third. 1 rep every 3 seconds, I think, is feasible. And what's wild is you can actually get first, second, third, fourth graders that can get to that level of 1 rep per second. So I think you can create those standards and go, let's say 30 reps in 20 reps in 1 minute, let's say for first and second grade as sort of a goal, and maybe go up by, 7 to 12 reps per age group, whatever that math is to kind of even it out. But I do think that's an important thing that you can share with them, because it also gives those younger kids to say, oh, I'm now doing wall ball at a fifth, sixth grade level. And there's kind of a confidence boost that comes with that.
No, that's great. Tosh, what do you think about this?
That's cool. I think at the younger ages, rather than a number, you need to give them a time. Because for some kids to get 10 reps might literally, if you're getting successive reps, it might literally take 25 minutes at the beginning. So if you work towards like, hey, just get 5 with your right hand, 5 with your left hand, and then there's a progression. But if you're looking to just answer the original question about middle school to high school, I think the amount should be pretty similar. If those middle school players are going to get to that level, the pace, which Martin pointed out, is different, but the actual amount should be similar. But I do think in our experience with Scituate at the younger ages, having specific goals and reward them with prizes for participation.
Fantastic. Great answer.
Love the rewards. I would also add in here, especially for wall ball in particular, it's such a common ask for athletes from coaches, is keep in mind that you can alter the, let's say the time as one example, but also the distance from the wall. So you could say, okay, for these younger age groups, yeah, you got to do the same amount of reps, but you can be 2 stick lengths away from the wall. Mm-hmm. And as you get older, you kind of move further and further away. And that's an added challenge as well.
Great answers. Love them. Last one. I coach a team of 3rd and 4th grade girls, but I'm friends and neighbors with our town's varsity coach. She tells me that my job is to teach the game, keep it fun, develop sportsmanship. And I'm on board with that. But it has me thinking, are these traits that we have to instill by a certain point? And if we don't, say before high school arrives, it'll be too late. That's fascinating, isn't it? The idea of we don't instill sportsmanship by now that the high schools, they don't have a shot. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I would disagree. It's never too late. Yeah.
I'm going to expand on it. I think you're right. I think that if there's no high school coach in the world who wouldn't see an example of bad sportsmanship and not address it. But I think it goes to show you, in my opinion, that it's easier to instill good habits at a young age. And I think that just kind of reinforces everything we've been talking about of how impressionable these young kids are, how they're still developing, how we have an active role in shaping them. So the earlier we get in on work ethic, sportsmanship, enjoying this sport, learn, don't be discouraged by results, I think the easier that becomes by the time they get to high school.
Absolutely. And I think sportsmanship is something you can teach all the time. It's not reserved for the handshake line at the end of a game against a out-of-town opponent. I think lacrosse is a sport that lends itself really well to a lot of physical play, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of battles, whether you're battling for a ground ball or, playing close D. And if you're battling it out with your teammate and one teammate, has more success than you or whatever it is, at the end of that battle, just like tell each other good job. And you're always modeling that, making sure that the girls do that. And when they do really battle, or the boys, I coach the boys too, when they do really battle, you want to praise that so that they know that it is okay. It is okay to really go after it with your teammates out here. We're making each other better. It's okay to be physical. It's okay to knock somebody down. The more I do that, the more I am making my teammates better. And when you do that, you help each other up and you tell each other good job. And it's just constant building of sportsmanship.
I think just to expand on that, like there can be that fine line of being competitive as something that we need. We need competition. We want our athletes to compete as hard as we can without being, let's say, cheap or dirty, right? There's sort of like an art of war principle of we want our competition, our enemy, to be at their best. And that can be very confusing for athletes to hear. It's like, I want my opponent to play their best game today because I assume we've all been in competitions where we win, but they didn't play well. It doesn't really feel as good. Like I want to beat you when you're at your best. That's I think part of being a good sport is actually trying your hardest and wanting your opponent to try your hardest as well. So I think that's an important thing for coaches to remember is like we don't want our opponent to play poorly and that be the reason that we won. Let's exude our best version of sportsmanship in that we're going to try our hardest and we're going to compete regardless of the result.
This has been a great conversation. I can't tell you how lucky I feel to get to have these conversations with coaches like you both. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Tosh for joining us today and lending in your expertise, which it is expert opinion. And we're grateful to have you in Matthew Flax and in around the Commonwealth. Thank you to Matthew Flax for helping to sponsor this and put this together. And as well as all the listeners for your support and tuning in. At the time of this taping, we are already live with our other episodes. So we are a go on Spotify and on YouTube for now. And we're just going to keep having these amazing conversations with great folks. So until we do this again, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.